Good evening. My name is Kieran Lorne. 2 nights ago, at a steakhouse in Fort Worth, my wife slid off her wedding ring and slammed it on the table in front of her entire family. "You're just an IT nobody. Get out." They laughed. They clapped, like they'd been waiting to watch me get written out of my own life. I walked out with that ring burning in my palm, knowing something no one at that table bothered to ask. The $53 million deal they were toasting to? It doesn't exist without my signature. So tell me, when the world decides you're nothing, but the proof says you're the one holding everything up, what kind of man are you supposed to be next? I didn't look back when I walked out of that steakhouse. I should have. Maybe it would have made what came next easier to swallow. But when a room full of people decides you're disposable, the air behind you doesn't feel worth turning into. The night had started like every other Kelm family celebration. Too much money in the decor, too much pride in the air, too little space for someone like me. Selene and I walked through the doors side by side, though it already felt like we were arriving from different worlds. The room smelled like ribeye and burnished wood, the kind of place where men with too much to prove cut their steaks with the confidence of people who've never been questioned. Kastner was the first to greet her, pulling her into a hug big enough to block me out completely. "The woman of the hour," he said, lifting his glass. Beckett followed, clapping me on the shoulder as if testing to see whether I'd crack. "Still doing that little tech gig, Kieran? Man, good thing Celine's out here winning real battles." I smiled the way I'd trained myself to smile. Tight, harmless, non-reactive. The smile of someone who doesn't want to ruin the evening. The smile of someone who learned a long time ago that pushing back just makes the room colder. Celine didn't correct him. She didn't correct anyone. We took our seats around a long oak table, polished so aggressively I could see my own reflection bowing back at me. The server poured wine, the family lifted glasses, and again, everything was about Celine's triumph, her strategy, her leadership, her brilliance. Not once did anyone mention compliance validation, infrastructure audits, risk mapping. The hours I'd spent in a dim spare room reviewing every layer that made their precious deal legal. Necessary details, but invisible ones. And I'd told myself I was fine with that being invisible was easier. But that night, something in the air pressed against me, hard enough to bruise. When Gavin raised his glass for a toast, everyone quieted. "To Celine," he said, voice booming across the table. "The woman who carried a $53 million miracle across the finish line." They cheered. Celine glowed. I exhaled. And, God help me, I made the mistake of speaking. "She didn't do it alone," I said. Calm. Too calm. The room dropped into silence so sharp it felt like someone had shut off the oxygen. Beckett let out a low chuckle, leaning back in his chair. "Oh, come on, man. Don't do that thing where you inflate whatever checkbox you clicked." A few cousins snickered. Even Miriam's polite smile hardened into something colder. I looked at Celine. I wanted her to say something, anything, to stop the slide. To tell them what I'd actually done, to acknowledge, even in a small way, that I hadn't imagined my part in all this. She didn't. Instead, she leaned in, voice light but lethal. "Kieran's just being dramatic. He handles low-level IT housekeeping. It has nothing to do with the strategic side of the deal." Low-level IT housekeeping. The words hit harder than anyone's laughter, because she knew exactly what I'd done. She knew the entire deal hinged on my signature. She knew the infrastructure would have failed compliance without my validation. She knew, and she chose the applause. The family roared, amused at the public shrink-wrapping of my existence. I sat still, pulse crawling under my skin. Something inside me tightened, thin, cracking, ready to split. And then she did the thing I never thought she'd do. Celine lifted her left hand, slow and deliberate, like she wanted to savor the moment. Her fingers curled around her wedding ring. She slipped it off, set it down, then drove it into the wooden table with a sharp metallic crack that echoed through my chest. "You're embarrassing me," she whispered. "Get out." Beckett clapped first. Of course he did. Then Kastner. Then the rest of the table joined in. A wave of applause that felt less like celebration and more like burial dirt hitting a coffin. My throat burned. My hands shook under the table. I stared at the ring, our ring, lying there like a piece of evidence in a crime scene. No one tried to stop me when I stood. No one called my name. No one pretended to care. I slipped the ring into my palm. It felt heavier than anything I'd carried in years. And as I walked past the hostess stand, out into the Texas night, one truth settled into me with a quiet, devastating clarity. It wasn't the ring that broke me. It was the applause. I don't remember most of the drive, just the blurred curve of headlights on I-30 and the way my pulse wouldn't settle no matter how tightly I gripped the wheel. By the time I pulled into the old complex in Weatherford, the night had stretched into something hollow and heavy, like it wanted to swallow me whole. The apartment looked the same as the day I'd told myself I didn't need it anymore. Second floor unit, dim outdoor bulb flickering, railing with chipped black paint. A place meant to be temporary. A backup plan. A parachute I never admitted I kept packed. The lock still stuck the way it always had. I had to jiggle it twice before the door swung open, releasing a breath of stale air, dust, old carpet, and the faint, metallic quiet of spaces no one loves. I didn't turn on the lights right away. I just stood there, letting my eyes adjust to the outlines, the jacket I'd left over the back of a chair, unopened mail stacked crooked on the counter, a pair of shoes kicked off near the couch like the person who lived here planned to come right back. The ring was still in my hand. My fingers had molded around it without realizing. When the silence finally settled on me, I sat on the couch. It groaned under my weight, and I felt something inside me groan with it. Small, tired, unraveling. I didn't cry. I don't know if that's strength or damage. But sitting in that half-dark room, all I could do was stare at the ceiling and let everything I'd held back for years crawl out of the cracks. It wasn't just what Celine did at the restaurant. It wasn't the ring, or the applause, or Beckett's smirk. Those were just the latest cuts, the final ones. The real wound had been festering for years. Thanksgiving. I hadn't thought about that night in forever. But suddenly, the memory hit me with the clarity of a bruise you press too hard. Her parents' long table, silverware lined like soldiers, Celine glowing as she talked about the Leadership Innovator Award she'd won, everyone praising her mind, her talent, her brilliance. And then her saying, "Oh, Kieran helped a little. He's my tech guy." Laughter spilling everywhere, hers included. Me smiling along, because what else was I supposed to do? Argue? Correct her? Break the illusion she thrived in? Back then, I told myself it didn't matter. That love was more important than credit. That supporting her was what husbands did. But love and erasure should never be confused for the same thing. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, trying to breathe through the tight, burning pressure behind my ribs. The ring glinted in my palm, accusing, exhausted, familiar. My phone buzzed. I almost ignored it, expecting some late-night courtesy text from the Kelms telling me to cool off, but the notification wasn't from them, it was from the Dallas board system. Final compliance packet received, authorization verified. Signatory K. Lorne timestamp, 11:42 p.m., my signature, my validation, my work. The deal they toasted to, mocked me over, couldn't exist without me. Literally, legally. A strange, sharp calm slid through me, flattening the edges of everything I'd been feeling. I sat up, letting the realization bloom in my chest, steady and unexpected. They didn't clap for Celine because she was the hero. They clapped because they never imagined I mattered. I stood and crossed the room to the small desk shoved near the wall. The laptop I'd abandoned months ago sat under a thin layer of dust. The battery was dead, of course, but the charger was still wrapped around the leg of the desk, just where I'd left it. I plugged it in and waited for the faint hum of life to return. When the screen blinked on, something in me blinked awake with it. My files were all there. The audit reports, the diagrams, the layered notes, the signature logs. Every piece of proof I'd poured into the project, quietly, carefully, invisibly, so people like Celine could stand under the spotlight without worrying the ground would crumble. I clicked through the documents. My name sat at the bottom of each one. My digital ID, my timestamps, my work. Hours earlier, a room full of people told me I was nothing. Now the system told me I was the foundation. A breath left me, slow, measured, not triumph, not anger. Something quieter, but stronger. A decision forming. Maybe they'd stepped on me for so long because I'd been lying down first. I closed the laptop and looked around the apartment. The dust, the dim light, the quiet heaviness. It wasn't home, but it was mine. And tonight, that meant more than it ever had. I lay on the thin mattress on the floor, staring at the ceiling until the first hint of dawn crept through the blinds. I didn't sleep. I just breathed, ring still tight in my fist, mind circling one truth that wouldn't let me go. I wasn't small. I'd only been taught to act like I was. By the time the sun pushed over the rooftops, I still hadn't slept. My body felt heavy, but my mind was strangely clear, like someone had scraped away months, maybe years, of fog. I grabbed my keys, slipped the ring into my pocket, and walked out of the apartment just as the morning quiet settled over Weatherford. The drive back to Fort Worth felt unreal. The suburbs were waking up, sprinklers ticking across perfect lawns, a kid wobbling on a bike with training wheels, a woman in a robe dragging the trash bin to the curb. Life doing what life does, moving forward, oblivious. My life felt paused, or maybe it had been paused for years, and I was only now noticing. The house came into view like a museum exhibit. Clean lines, manicured hedges, a front porch staged for a catalog. I parked a few houses down. I wasn't avoiding attention. I just needed a second to breathe before walking into what used to be my life. The key slid into the lock the same way it always had, but crossing that threshold didn't feel like coming home. It felt like stepping into a place where I'd once lived, but never belonged. Everything was spotless, counters gleaming, pillows arranged with unnatural precision. My things, what few I'd had, felt more like props than possessions. A diploma hung slightly behind a decorative vase. A stack of my books tucked in a corner as if they were clutter to be minimized. It hit me then. The house reflected her. Not us. Her voice drifted from the kitchen. She was on speakerphone again, that polished tone she used when she wanted the world to see her as unshakable. No, it's fine, she said. He'll settle down like he always does. I just need to keep this week clean. The firm's watching me. I knew she didn't mean clean. She meant controlled. I stepped closer, staying out of sight for a moment, not hiding, just absorbing. I carried that deal from start to finish, she continued. Honestly, I deserve this moment without him turning it into drama. A pause, then a laugh. Oh, please. He barely touched the technical side. He checks boxes. I felt something in my chest fold in on itself. Not pain exactly, but recognition. A truth I'd been refusing to look at. The side door opened and Miriam walked in, heels clicking like punctuation marks. Good, she said, voice low but sharp. Last night was a start. Men like him always cling if you're not firm. You need to move quickly before he finds a way to turn things around. Celine sighed, weary but certain. Don't worry. I'm filing on Monday. I want everything squared away before he starts with one of his long explanations. Long explanations. She meant facts. She meant truth. She meant anything that didn't fit her narrative. I stepped into the kitchen doorway. Both of them jolted, just a little, but not enough to look guilty. Just startled that their script had been interrupted. So that's where things stand, said. Celine straightened, searching for the version of herself she used on people who mattered, the soft voice, the measured empathy. But she didn't find it. She didn't need it. Kieran, she said carefully, this is for the best. We haven't been right for a long time, and the sooner you accept that, the cleaner everything will be. Miriam crossed her arms, silent approval radiating off her. I looked at Celine, not the woman I married, not the woman I'd tried to support, but the woman who had just reduced me to a logistical inconvenience. I'll get what's mine, I said quietly. She exhaled, relieved. Miriam gave a small, satisfied smile, as if the conversation were already settled, wrapped, filed. But they were reading the wrong version of me. That old version, the one who swallowed humiliation because conflict felt worse, hadn't walked back into this house. I moved through the hallway to what had been my office in name only. A couple shirts, a notebook, a watch. Nothing that suggested a life, just fragments of someone who had learned to tuck himself into corners. While gathering my things, I noticed a framed picture on the dresser, one from our wedding. My smile looked real. Hers looked rehearsed. Maybe it always had. When I walked back toward the front door, I paused and took in the house one last time. The curated perfection. The sterile order. The way everything seemed designed to hide imperfections, including me. I didn't feel grief, I felt release. The door clicked behind me, soft, final. Outside, the air felt different. Not lighter, not yet, but honest. I didn't drive straight back to the apartment. My hands turned the wheel almost instinctively toward 7th Street, toward a place that wasn't home either, but at least didn't pretend to be. The cafe looked exactly like I remembered it, scuffed tiles, old neon sign humming faintly, the smell of cheap beans and warm pastries. It wasn't impressive, but it was real. Talia looked up from behind the counter. Recognition flickered across her face, followed by something else, concern. "It's been a while," she said. "You look like you've had a night." I gave a quiet laugh, the kind that doesn't reach your eyes. Something like that. I took my usual seat, the back table near the outlet, and opened my laptop. The screen lit up instantly, waiting, steady. Unlike everything else in my life, I pulled up the files. Then I pulled up Celine's presentation deck beside them. I didn't want to see the parallels, but they were impossible to ignore. Frameworks, terminology, Structure. The exact architecture I had built over months. Lifted, polished, rephrased. But mine. Every piece of praise she took last night was built on the backbone of work I had done unseen. As the comparisons deepened, as the reality sharpened, I felt the familiar sting of betrayal. But this time, it didn't hollow me out. It clarified me. Celine hadn't, simply stopped appreciating me. She had rewritten me out of the story. And for the first time in years, I felt something like strength rising to meet that truth. Because now I saw the whole picture. I wasn't losing a marriage. I was stepping out of a shadow I'd mistaken for shelter. And she had no idea who she'd pushed out into the light. The longer I stared at the two files glowing side by side on my screen, the audit framework I built, and the glossy investor deck Celine presented, the harder it became to deny what I was seeing. She hadn't borrowed from my work. She had traced it, line for line, structure for structure. The same architecture I drafted during nights when she said she was too stressed to think straight. A hollow pressure bloomed behind my sternum, not quite anger, not quite grief, something heavier than both. The kind of feeling that tells you the story you've been living in wasn't just slightly crooked. It was engineered that way. You're here early for a Sunday. I looked up. Ronan slid into the seat across from me, still in his worn black hoodie, hair messy like he'd rolled out of bed and into the car the second he read my text. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't need to. One look at my face and at the files on my screen, and he exhaled a low, knowing breath. "Let me guess," he said. "She didn't just take credit. She took the whole damn blueprints." I rotated the laptop toward him. He didn't speak for a while. His jaw worked once, then again. He zoomed in, scrolled, cross-checked headers, metadata, version history. "Jesus," he muttered. "This isn't similar, Kieran. This is a rebuild. Cosmetic edits on top of your skeleton." I nodded, but the motion felt disconnected from my body. "There's more." I pulled up the timestamps, the night she downloaded my final draft directly from my shared folder. He leaned in, scanning the logs. "She took it before she even pitched," he said. "Before approvals. Before the board even discussed it." He leaned back, jaw tightening. "She planned to cut you out from the start." The words stung, but not because they were new. They hurt because they completed a puzzle I'd been refusing to see. Behind the counter, the espresso machine hissed. A chair scraped across tile, normal sounds of a normal day. It all felt too gentle for the reality unspooling in front of me. Talia approached with a fresh coffee. "On the house," she said softly. Her eyes flicked between us, then to my screen, and something softened in her expression. Not pity, but recognition. "You used to come in here with 2 monitors and a backpack stuffed like you lived out of it," she said. "You looked alive back then. Tired, but alive. I hope whatever you're doing now takes you back to that." It was a small thing, a simple observation, but it landed deeper than I expected. Because somewhere along the way, I had stopped recognizing the man she remembered. After she walked away, Ronan closed my laptop gently, as if the files themselves were volatile. "Kieran," he said, voice low, "if she's willing to steal your work at this level, she'll be willing to rewrite the legal trail too. You know that, right?" I did know. I just hadn't let myself say it out loud. "She's already rewriting it," I murmured. "She told her sister the deal was all hers." "That's PR," he said. "I'm talking documentation, paperwork, compliance narratives, internal records. If she's building a version of events without you in it, the next logical step is to bury your contribution so deep the board never sees you. The idea hit like a cold snap under my skin. Then I won't let her, I said quietly. He gave a single, sharp nod. Good, because you have one thing she doesn't. My integrity? I tried to joke. No, he said, shaking his head. Your receipts. He motioned for the laptop again, and I handed it over. We pulled up deeper logs, system revisions, pathway trails, administrator snapshots. And the more we looked, the clearer the truth became. She hadn't just taken my work. She'd built her entire narrative on top of it, as if I were scaffolding, a temporary support beam to be removed once the structure was stable enough to show off. But here's what she forgot. Scaffolding holds the whole thing up. Ronan sat back, rubbing his hands over his face. We need to gather everything. Full metadata exports, file histories, autosave versions, every trace from initial concept to final validation. And then what? I asked. He looked at me, really looked at me. Then we make sure you don't walk into Monday empty-handed. My pulse kicked once, hard. Sunday had started with quiet intentions, closure, understanding, maybe even resignation. But sitting across from Ronan with the truth laid out like evidence in a case I'd never meant to prosecute, I felt something shift. This wasn't about saving a marriage. This was about refusing to let someone erase me. I reopened the laptop. The cursor blinked on the screen, steady, waiting, patient. All right, I said, let's get to work. Because if Selene wanted a clean week, she should have thought twice before building her success out of my name. We didn't talk much on the drive back to my apartment. Ronan followed me in his car, headlights steady in the mirror like a promise he wasn't going to let me go through this alone. The sun had dropped behind the rooftops, leaving the sky washed in a dark blue that looked colder than night should ever feel in Texas. Inside the apartment, the air was still thick with the same stale quiet as the night before. I switched on the lamp, yellow light pooling over the cluttered counter, the old carpet, the laptop waiting like it already knew what was coming. Ronan didn't waste time. He set his bag down, opened his own laptop, and said, "All right, no assumptions. We audit everything." It wasn't said dramatically. It didn't need to be. There was a seriousness in his voice I'd only heard once before, when we were working a breach for a nonprofit being targeted by a disgruntled former employee. That same tension, that same awareness. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was an attack. He slid my laptop toward me. Open the cloud admin panel. I typed in the credentials. The familiar dashboard loaded, but the moment I saw the list of user activity logs, something in my stomach tightened. We start with timestamps, Ronan said, leaning in beside me. His voice was steady, but his focus sharpened into something razor-edged. Pull up the week before her pitch. I clicked. The logs unfolded, rows of time entries, file access summaries, credential IDs. At first, everything looked regular, and then Ronan pointed. There, 3 late-night sessions, all the same user credential, Skelm Corp., all targeting the same folder. Dallas Infrastructure. Final draft chain, all within a 48-hour window. My throat tightened. She said she never touched my files. Ronan huffed out a breath. Yeah, well, she did. He clicked deeper into the details, pulling up the action history. The screen flickered as metadata loaded, and then the truth hit like a drop into ice water. Entire comment threads I'd written were gone, revision markers stripped, author fields overwritten, my initials deleted on multiple entries. "Oh my God," I whispered. Ronan didn't look away from the screen. She cleaned everything that tied the conceptual framework to you. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he opened the system's internal event log. And here, he added, tapping near the bottom of the window, she tried to override your signature block. He clicked the line. The pop-up appeared. Signature override failed. Encryption tag locked. There it is, he said quietly. She tried to forge your compliance approval. My pulse thudded loud in my ears, slow, disbelieving, like my body was struggling to keep up with what my mind was seeing. She tried to forge me, I murmured. No, Ronan corrected gently but firmly. She tried to erase you. That distinction hit harder than I wanted it to. I stepped back from the table, running both hands through my hair, pacing a slow line across the small living room. The air felt thin. My chest felt too tight. The apartment walls seemed to tilt inward, like they'd been waiting for this exact moment to collapse. It wasn't just the theft. It wasn't even the betrayal. It was the intention, the thought-out, step-by-step destruction of my identity inside a project I had poured months of my life into. She hadn't tripped into this or acted out of impulse. She planned it, mapped it, built a version of the truth where I never existed at all. Come here, Ronan said. I forced myself back to the table. He opened another folder, one I hadn't clicked on. This was sitting in her shared drive, he said. A draft email. Subject, confidentiality breach. Urgent advisory body. Concerns regarding K. Lorne's handling of secure files. Potential compromise of system integrity. Recommend immediate internal review. My vision blurred. Not from tears, just disbelief so deep it felt like vertigo. She was going to accuse me, I said, of compromising the deal. Yeah, Ronan answered, his voice low. If she sends something like this to legal, you won't just lose your job, she'll bury your credibility. No one in this field hires someone flagged for a breach. A long silence tightened between us. She was ready to burn everything down, I whispered, just to step over the ashes. For the image, Ronan said, for the story she wants them to believe. I sank into the chair, elbows on my knees, palms pressed to my face. I didn't know if I was shaking, but it felt like the ground beneath me was. This whole time, I'd thought I was fighting heartbreak. But now I understood something far worse. I wasn't fighting to save a marriage. I was fighting a woman who had already decided my absence made her life easier. After a long minute, I dropped my hands and looked at Ronan. What do we do? He didn't hesitate. We build a case. You back up everything. Print logs, export metadata, lock your credentials, and tomorrow, he paused, meeting my eyes, you walk into that boardroom with proof. And if she denies everything, she won't be able to. The system doesn't lie. I nodded, not because I felt confident, but because resolve was slowly taking the place of fear, brick by brick, breath by breath. We worked for hours, exporting documents, encrypting drives, creating two binders, one for me, one sealed with Ronan in case anything went missing later. By midnight, the table was stacked with printouts, evidence, USB sticks, layers of digital footprints. Celine either didn't know existed or thought she'd erased well enough. Ronan zipped the last folder shut. This, he said, patting the binder, is what protects you. I stood there, staring at it. Not triumphant, not angry, just steady. For the first time in years. And then, a single, quiet thought slid into my mind, sharp enough to still me. She thinks I'll disappear. She thinks I'll fold like I always have. But tomorrow, she's going to learn something she never bothered to notice. I'm not the man she built her version of me around, and I'm done being erased. I slept for maybe an hour, if you could even call it sleep. It felt more like my body shutting down just long enough to reboot. The evidence binder sat on the table like a living thing, its weight filling the apartment even when my eyes were closed. By morning, the sky outside had turned a dusty gray, clouds hanging low the way they do before a Texas storm. I brewed coffee I didn't taste, splashed water on my face, and tried to steady myself. Today wasn't about anger. It wasn't even about justice. It was about refusing to be erased. A sharp knock rattled the front door. 3 short raps. I froze, mug halfway to my lips. Ronan wouldn't knock like that. Talia didn't know where I lived. And Celine? No. She wouldn't come here. Another knock, harder this time. I opened the door. Reddick Kelm filled the doorway, broad-shouldered suit jacket perfectly pressed, expression carved from granite. He walked past me without waiting for permission, surveying the apartment as though confirming all his worst assumptions about me. "So this is where you ran off to," he said. "Figures." I shut the door quietly. "What do you want, Reddick?" He turned toward me, fingers tapping an envelope against his palm. "I'm here to keep things clean. Celine doesn't need distractions this week." Distractions. That was what I was to them. Noise to be minimized, furniture to be pushed aside. He extended the envelope. "This is a separation agreement. Sign it before she files. It'll look better for you." I didn't touch it. "Better," I repeated. "For me." He shrugged. "You walk away quietly. We walk away quietly. No drama, no blowback. You get a clean exit." "And if I don't?" He gave a tight smile, the kind people wear when they think they're being generous. "Then you make this messy. No one wants messy. Especially not you." My jaw tightened. "You don't get to tell me what I want." Reddick chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Kieran, come on. You've always gone along with what's best for Celine. No point changing character now." Character. As if he knew anything about mine. He stepped closer. "Look, man to man. She's doing what she needs to do. Big deal at stake. Reputation on the line. You don't want to be the one dragging her down." There it was. The truth beneath all their curated concern. They didn't just see me as small. They needed me to stay small. "Just sign," Reddick said, extending the envelope again. "You'll save everyone time." I held his stare. For years, I would have caved at this point, mumbled something about wanting peace, backing down to avoid conflict, convincing myself that was maturity. But the man he expected was gone. "I'm not signing anything," I said quietly. His expression faltered. Not much, but enough to reveal genuine surprise. He hadn't planned for resistance, not from me. "Kieran," he said slowly, "don't make this harder than it needs to be." I took a small step forward, closing the distance. "You came here to intimidate me, deliver her message, package it nicely. But here's my message. You don't control me, and neither does she." A flicker of irritation crossed his face. The envelope crumpled slightly in his grip. "You're making a mistake," he said. "No," I replied. "I'm correcting one." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he pocketed the envelope, straightened his jacket, and walked to the door. "This won't end the way you think," he said. I opened the door for him. "I know," I answered. "It won't end the way you think either." He hesitated, just for a second, then stepped out into the hall. The door clicked shut behind him, and the apartment fell silent again. But it was a different kind of silence this time. Not heavy, not suffocating, clear. I looked at the binder on the table, the physical proof of everything Celine tried to rewrite, and something inside me settled, like a line I'd been afraid to draw finally etched itself into the ground. I wasn't the man they expected. I wasn't the man they could manipulate. I wasn't the man they could intimidate into disappearing. And tomorrow, when I walked into that building in Dallas, they were going to learn exactly who I had become the moment Celine slammed that ring onto the table. A man who finally understood the cost of silence and had no intention of paying it anymore. I left the apartment before sunrise on Monday, the air thick and unmoving, the kind of Texas humidity that makes even breathing feel like work. The binder sat on the passenger seat, buckled in like it was a living witness. Every few minutes I'd glance at it, not for reassurance, but to remind myself this wasn't a nightmare I'd wake from. This was real. And today was the reckoning. Dallas rose out of the haze like a glass and steel warning. As I pulled into the underground parking garage of the headquarters, my pulse tightened into something sharp and hot, but not frantic. It felt controlled, like pressure that knew exactly where it needed to land. The lobby was already busy. Employees scanning badges, the hum of conversation, the click of heels ricocheting off marble floors. People I'd worked beside for years passed without looking at me twice, except one. At the reception desk, dressed in a pearl blouse and a practiced smile, stood Celine. Her mother, Miriam, was beside her, and a head of security stood at attention as if waiting for instructions. They were laughing. For a split second, I just watched her. Watched how easily she moved, how effortlessly she occupied whatever space she stepped into. She always had that gift. But now I saw the other side of it, how she weaponized it, how she used charm as a shield and confidence as camouflage. The moment she spotted me, her smile twitched, not fear, not guilt, just annoyance, like I was a dish sent back to the kitchen. The receptionist cleared her throat. "Mr. Lorne, I'm sorry, but you're not permitted on the executive floor today. We were informed." I slid the printed email across the counter. Board clearance, signed, verified. Her eyes widened. She nodded quickly and handed it back. "My apologies, sir. You're cleared." I thanked her gently. None of this was her fault. As I walked past, Miriam leaned toward Celine and whispered something I couldn't catch. Both laughed under their breath, quiet, practiced, cruel. But that wasn't what hit hardest. What hit hardest was knowing that 2 days ago, I would have felt this was my fault. Today, I didn't feel that at all. Halfway down the corridor toward the elevators, someone called my name. A junior analyst, can't remember if his name was Emery or Avery, hurried toward me, eyes darting nervously. "I shouldn't really be showing you this," he said, glancing over his shoulder before holding up his phone. It was an internal memo, unsigned, sent from the PR address belonging to Celine's family firm. The accusation was stunning in how cleanly it cut. Kieran Lorne has violated multiple data protocols, potential breach, compromised security layers, reputational risk. My stomach dropped, but not with panic, more like recognition. The smear campaign had begun before I even stepped foot in the building. "Went out an hour ago," the analyst whispered. "I just thought you should know." I nodded. "Thank you." As he slipped away, hushed voices stirred behind me. Heads turned and quickly looked elsewhere. Smiles evaporated the second I passed. Fear is contagious. Smear campaigns are efficient. I kept walking. At the elevators, I adjusted my tie, trying to steady myself, when two security officers approached. "Mr. Lorne," one said, tone polite but firm, "we've been informed your presence isn't required on the executive floor today." I breathed once, slow, deliberate. "By whom?" "Your wife, sir. She stated this session is internal. Executive leadership only." Before I could answer, a voice cut in behind me. "He is required today." Ronan. He held up his badge like a blade. Security read it, exchanged a quick glance, and stepped back. "Apologies, sir," the taller one muttered. Ronan clapped my shoulder, leaning just close enough for only me to hear. "The board coordinator is expecting you. Don't let them bluff you again." My chest loosened. Just a fraction. Enough. We walked together toward the glass doors of the executive hallway, but Celine wasn't finished. She stepped into our path, moves sharp and fast, eyes blazing with a fury she hadn't expected to need this morning. "You really think you belong in this room?" she hissed. "You think one little signature makes you important?" I glanced down at her left hand. Bare. Still no ring. "You forged my clearance block," I said quietly, "and you tried to have me escorted out." Her eyes flickered, just for a heartbeat, but it was enough. Enough to show fear, surprise, the unraveling of a script she'd rehearsed too perfectly. But just as fast, she straightened. "You were always background, Kieran. Don't confuse proximity with relevance." Her words didn't land. For the first time, they had nowhere left to stick. Before she could say another word, the conference room doors opened and a voice called out, "Mr. Lorne, we're ready for you." I stepped around her, calm, grounded, unshaken, not as her husband, not as someone they dismissed, but as the man whose signature held the entire deal together. Celine stood frozen behind me, every piece of her careful plan starting to fracture. And somewhere deep inside me, under all the exhaustion and betrayal, a quiet truth settled into place. She thought she knew everything I was capable of. She had no idea who she was about to face in that room. The boardroom was colder than I expected. Polished glass walls, a long stone table, the hum of recessed lights overhead. Executives murmured greetings, flipping through their packets, coffee cups clinking against saucers. It should have felt intimidating. It didn't. Maybe because I'd already lived through something worse, a room full of people applauding my erasure. I took my seat near the corner, intentionally just outside the spotlight. I didn't need center stage. I just needed the truth to breathe. Ellery Price, the board chair, cleared her throat. "Let's begin." She hadn't even finished the sentence before Celine stood. No hesitation, no transition. She moved like a woman who'd rehearsed this moment in the mirror. "I need to raise a compliance issue," she said, sliding a printed document into the center of the table. Her tone was flat, professional, but the venom in the content rippled through the room. She accused me of compromising data layers, falsifying internal access, negligently approving the contract, jeopardizing the entire deal. Word for word, it mirrored the drafted email Ronan and I had found the night before. Several executives exchanged wary glances. Not outright condemnation, but doubt. Doubt is all a lie needs to take root. Celine continued, voice steady but sharp. "I believe the contract's technical validation should be re-examined." Ellery turned to me, composed but curious. "Mr. Lorne, do you wish to respond?" I didn't stand dramatically, didn't raise my voice, didn't argue. I simply placed the sealed evidence envelope onto the table and slid it forward. "Yes," I said, "I do." The compliance director opened it, pulling out pages of logs, metadata trails, chain of custody printouts, digital signature keys. As he flipped through them, his brow furrowed, slowly at first, then deeper, like he was reading something that grew more impossible with each page. He motioned to the IT director, who logged into the system and began verifying the entries live. A hush fell over the room, not tense but concentrated, the kind of silence that often precedes a truth no one expects. The compliance director looked up. "The deletion attempts," he said carefully, "did not originate from Mr. Lorne's credentials." Celine blinked. Once, twice. He continued, "The access logs, 3 late-night sessions, came from a single credential, Kelm Corp., and the device ID matches the workstation at your home address." A few board members leaned back. Others leaned in. Celine's face began to stiffen, not with confidence this time, but with the kind of panic someone tries to hide behind poise. This is incorrect," she said, voice too fast. "Anyone could have used my login. You're misreading. This isn't..." But the system didn't stutter. It didn't bend. It didn't care about her tone. The IT director chimed in. "There's also a signature override. Attempt targeting Mr. Lorne's approval block. It failed due to embedded encryption." He paused, looking directly at her. "The fingerprint scan attached to the override request matches yours, Ms. Kelm." It felt like the entire room inhaled at once. Celine stared at the table, at the printouts, at me. "No," she whispered. He wasn't supposed to have that. He didn't..." She cut herself off, eyes going glassy. Her narrative, the one she'd built so carefully, so completely, was fracturing in real time. Ellery Price lifted the contract packet and opened it to the signature page. The final approval. My name. My digital timestamp. Clear. Verified. Undeniable. Celine swallowed hard, her composure collapsing by degrees. Then, for the first time in months, maybe years, she looked at me not with superiority, not with annoyance, but with something close to fear. "Please," she whispered, voice cracking. Don't let this destroy me." A plea, but not a confession, and not remorse, just panic. I didn't speak. There was nothing left to defend. The truth was already standing. Ellery glanced around the table. "We'll take a 10-minute recess. Ms. Kelm, Mr. Lorne, please wait outside." I rose. My legs didn't shake. My hands didn't tremble. The earth didn't tilt under my feet. I felt grounded, more than I had in years. In the hallway, Ronan leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "You didn't just show them," he said quietly. "You made the lie impossible to stand on." Before I could answer, soft footsteps approached behind us. "Kieran." Celine. Her voice was small, frayed. When I turned, she wasn't the polished strategist or the woman who slammed her ring on the table. She looked unsteady, eyes wet, shoulders drawn inward. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I don't know why I did all of this. I lost sight of everything. Please, don't leave me. You're the only person who ever stayed." The pain in her voice was real, but so was the damage she'd done. I bent slightly to meet her eyes, not as her husband, not as her rival, but as the man she'd spent years shrinking. "You didn't want me to stay," I said gently. "You wanted me silent." She closed her eyes. Her breath hitched. I helped her to her feet when her legs wobbled, but then I stepped back, drawing a line that existed long before this hallway. 10 minutes later, the board reconvened. The decision was quick, clinical, final. Celine was suspended pending investigation, removed from all executive decisions. And for the first time in a long time, the truth didn't whisper. It stood tall, visible, unshakable. As I walked out of the boardroom, every step felt like shedding a weight I'd carried without realizing it. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vindictive. I felt free. And when the doors closed behind me, the sound wasn't harsh. It sounded like a beginning. When the boardroom doors shut behind me, the world didn't erupt into applause or vindication. There was no cinematic swell of music, no triumphant rush of adrenaline. Instead, there was quiet. A clean, almost fragile quiet that felt like stepping out of a storm and realizing the ground was finally steady beneath you. Ronan was waiting in the hallway, arms crossed, a half grin tugging at his mouth. "You didn't just defend yourself," he said. "You surgically removed the lie." I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. It left me slow, like air leaking from a tire patched too many times. For the first time in days, maybe years, breathing didn't hurt. We started walking toward the elevators in a silence that didn't need to be filled. My binder was tucked under my arm, lighter now that the truth had already done its work. Ronan nudged my shoulder once, a quiet gesture that said everything he wasn't the type to say out loud. "Kieran." Her voice came from behind us. Soft. Thin. Nothing like the Celine I married or the Celine who tried to bury me. I turned. She stood a few feet away, not in command of the room, not on a pedestal, just small. As if the layers she'd built around herself had finally cracked and she didn't know how to stand without them. Her eyes shimmered, red around the edges. "I'm sorry," she said, words trembling. "I messed up. I lost myself. I didn't mean to." She stopped, swallowed hard. "Please don't walk away from me. You're the only person who ever stayed." The thing is, years ago, that line might have broken me. Back then, I believed staying was proof of love, proof of loyalty, proof of who I was. But now, standing in that bright hallway under the fluorescent hum, I saw the truth clearly. Staying had cost me pieces of myself I'd never been asked for, only expected to give. I stepped closer, not to comfort, not to wound, but to meet her where she was, eye to eye, human to human. "You didn't want me to stay," I said quietly. "You wanted me silent." A tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't deny it. She couldn't. Her knees buckled suddenly, and she sank to the floor, not from theatrics, not from manipulation, but from something raw and unguarded. Instinctively, I reached down and helped her back up. Not as a husband, not as a savior, just as a man unwilling to let anyone crumble at his feet, even now. But the moment she steadied, I stepped back. A line drawn, not with anger, but with finality. "Kieran," she whispered, one last flicker of hope in her voice. "I know," I said gently, "but this isn't my place anymore." And for once, she understood. Ronan and I walked toward the lobby. The air felt different, cleaner, sharper, like the building itself had exhaled. Outside, the sky had shifted to a soft Texas blue. Clouds stretched thin like someone had smoothed the edges of the morning. The breeze hit my face, cool and grounding. I tilted, my head back, looking up at the wide expanse above the glass towers, and it struck me, not dramatically, not painfully, just truthfully. This was the first morning in a long time that didn't feel borrowed. My phone buzzed. "Ronan, lunch? You need actual food." I typed back, "Yeah, and maybe a fresh start." He nodded toward the parking lot. "Come on, I know a place." As we walked across the concrete, past people who no longer whispered, no longer stared at me as if I were a liability, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not triumph, not relief. Space. The kind you don't notice you're missing until it finally returns. Some endings don't crash. They don't snap. They don't burn the world down. Some endings close softly, like a door that's been waiting years to be shut, and leave you standing in front of a sky that suddenly looks wider than it ever did before. I took one last breath of that cool morning air, let it fill my lungs, and stepped toward whatever came next.